Thank you. Okay, so we'll be starting. I'll just give maybe a few minutes for us to please move a bit closer, those who are at the back. All right. Once more, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Dr. Ntone from the College of Law, specifically PCIL, and I'll be your program director for our afternoon session. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, members of the College of Law, students, and all participants joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the College of Law Research and Innovation Workshop, held as part of Unisa's 2026 Research Innovation Week under the theme Unisa's Catalytic Niche Area, Powering Change. This theme reminds us that universities are not merely space for teaching and learning, but also important centers for generating ideas, shaping policies, and contributing solutions to societal challenges. As the College of Law, we remain committed to research and innovation that advance justice, equality, accountability, and social transformation. Today's workshop provides an important platform of meaningful engagement on issues that continue to shape our legal, social, and institutional landscape. Our focus on the institutionalization of feminism, womenism, and Bosadi speaks directly to ongoing conversations about inclusion, representation, leadership, and social justice within our society and our institution. These conversations are necessary if we are to build responsive and transformative legal and governance system. We are privileged to have with us Ms. Naledi Selobano from the Commission of Gender Equality as our main speaker. Her extensive experience in gender policy, research, and advocacy, both nationally and internationally, makes her exceptionally well placed to guide today's engagement. We look forward to the insights she will be sharing with us. I would also like to acknowledge our distinguished panel members, whose expertise from various disciplines within the College of Law will enrich our discussions this afternoon. Most importantly, I wish to thank all participants for taking time to join us. Your presence demonstrates a shared commitment to scholarship that not only informs academic debate, but also contributes to societal change and human development. Without further delay, it is my honor to invite the Executive Dean of the College of Law, Professor Budili Namokonde, to deliver the opening address. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. How are you guys doing? I'm sure you can tell that I am not. Prof. Budeli, she requested me to come on her behalf. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us due to other competing responsibilities of the university, but she did indicate that she wishes us well and that we are going to have a very fruitful engagement this afternoon. But before I do what she has requested me to do, I would like to first acknowledge our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Puleng Lekabula. our vice principals, our portfolio heads within the college, chairs of departments, and every one of you. You make this event, you make the college, and you make the university. I would also like to acknowledge our guest speaker, Ms. Naledi Silibane, who is a director of policy and research, and she is also an incoming provincial manager of Gauteng at the Commission for Gender Equality. We are honored to have you, ma'am, and thank you for making the time to treat us to your thoughts and insight on institutionalization of feminism, womanism, and Busadi. I would also like to acknowledge our panelists from both the School of Law and the School of Criminal Justice. We are in the middle of exams which started recently. I think they started last week. And for you to, in the midst of the exam period, to set aside time to come and form part of the panel really means a lot for the college. So would like to thank you for that. I know your schedules have been busy with the marking. We just concluded the marking, which was a marathon in itself. So that really speaks to your dedication to the college, and we thank you, colleagues. This year's Research and Innovation Week places a particular emphasis on the university's catalytic niche area. And colleges seek to make meaningful and measurable contribution to societal transformation and global knowledge production. Yesterday, we celebrated the Africa Day, which reminded us of the importance of advancing an African scholarship that speaks to the realities, aspirations, and challenges of our continent. Africa Day is not only a celebration of unity and liberation, it is also a call to action for African institutions of higher learning to produce knowledge that is grounded in the lived experiences of our people and responsive to the developmental needs of the continent. At Unisa, research is not pursued for its own sake. It is driven by a purpose, guided by the pressing realities of our society, and inspired by the possibility of improving lives and strengthen communities and advance human development. I'm hoping that the deliberations that we are going to have today will not only be centered around the CNA or the catalytic niche areas, but I'm also hoping that they will find articulation for our continent. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the College of Law Research and Innovation Workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mtlongo, for representing our Dean of the College. We will now call on Prof. Malamela, who will come up to give us the context and introduction of our guest speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Program Director, Dr. Ntoni. Thanks also to Prof. Mhlongo for the warm and insightful opening address on behalf of the Executive Dean of the College. I am taking this opportunity to acknowledge the college management under the stewardship of Professor Budeli Namakonde, the school directors, heads of portfolios, and the heads of various departments. A good afternoon to you all, colleagues, and a special greetings to our our guests and students in attendance of this important university and college event. Words of acknowledgement and appreciation to our main speaker, panel members, and all the other program participants. Thanks to you all for agreeing to be part of today's program. We are looking forward to your thoughtful and insightful contributions to the R&I theme, and in particular the topic of this workshop. Colleagues, the 2026 Universities Research and Innovation Week started yesterday, the 25th of May, and will end on Friday, of the 29th of May, 2026. The R&I Week is an annual institutional week-long event on the university's calendar intended to showcase research excellence, interdisciplinary collaborations, innovation, and Africa-centered scholarship and knowledge production. The event brings together academic students, policymakers, and innovators to engage on contemporary societal and scientific issues and challenges. All activities taking place during this week are meant to give the university, colleges, institutes, and researchers the opportunity to display their research activities, research projects, and to create research awareness, as well as to promote the university's 10 catalytic niche areas. Today's gathering will focus mainly on the catalytic niche area of feminist, humanist, and Busari theorizations and the institutionalization thereof. Giving special attention to this catalytic niche area in particular, ladies and gentlemen, validates the college's commitment to socially responsive knowledge production. It also positions this niche area not merely as an academic perspective, but as a framework for institutional social justice and inclusivity. This exercise, we should all agree, colleagues, that requires moving existing theories beyond mere academic discussions into sustained institutional transformation that would include, among others, the transformation of the curriculum and policies, as well as the integration of feminist, humanist, and Busari theorizations into scholarly identity, collaborative, and leadership structures, and research funding priorities. This further requires us to rethink legal scholarship through gender-responsive jurisprudence and intersectional justice approaches. And it also creates space for critical engagement when coming to issues such as inclusivity in legal education and constitutional transformation. The theme for the 2026 R&I Week is Unisa's catalytic niche areas, powering change. Thus, the primary aim of the 2026 R&I program is to foster transformation and strengthen interdisciplinary collaborations through the 10 catalytic niche areas. This will, among other things, assist in promoting impactful and socially responsive research and scholarship, positioning African scholarship within the global academic discourse, as well as in forging and strengthening partnerships between academia, society, industry, and government. This is also a reaffirmation that the university and its colleges do not only see research and innovation as an academic exercise, but also as a tool for societal transformation and sustainable development. Program Director and ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce to you Ms. Naledi Slebano, our main speaker for this event. Colleagues, Naledi is a gender policy and research practitioner with extensive experience in advancing gender equality, human rights, and social justice in South Africa. She currently serves in a senior role at the Commission for Gender Equality and is in the process of transitioning from Deputy Director, Policy and Research to Provincial Manager for Gauteng. Her work focuses on, among others, gender-based violence, child and adolescents, pregnancy, statutory rape, land rights for women, gender and political leadership, women in correctional facilities, and broader intersectional inequalities with a strong focus on translating research into policy and advocacy impact. Naledi has participated in international engagements, including presentations at the United Nations and the African Union, where she has contributed to global and continental discourse on gender governance and social justice. These platforms have strengthened their ability to engage across diverse policy environments and to situate local challenges within broader international frameworks. Naledi holds a Master of Arts by Research and is currently a first-year MBA candidate at Wits Business School with a growing interest in governance, strategic management, and leadership. As a transformational and people-centered leader, Naledi believes strongly in the inherent potential of every individual. Her leadership approach is grounded in feminist principles, including reflexivity, power sharing, intersectionality, and accountability, which she applies in both organizational and policy context. She is deeply committed to continuous self-development and views leadership as a practice that must be consciously cultivated. Beyond her professional work, Naledi is passionate about mental health advocacy and equitable access to quality education. She remains open-minded, curious, and committed to lifelong learning, always seeking opportunities to grow and learn from others. Mayor Selebano, we are honored to have you as our main speaker today, and we are looking forward to your insightful address. And ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause as I invite Naledi to the podium. Thanks very much, President Director.
Thank you very much. That was generous. I was wondering, who is he talking about? Dean of College of Law, Prof. Budeli Nemakonde. Head of Research at the College of Law, Prof. Manamela. School directors, chairs, departments, academics, students, comrades and fellow activists, good afternoon. I have only two disclaimers. One is that I tend to have hand tremors because of the medication that I'm taking. So if you happen to see that, don't think it's because I'm intimidated by the room. It's just a side effect. The second one is that I happen to carry a womb. So I experience what we call period pains. And I've taken very potent painkillers because over time, they have worsened. And so sometimes I look a little bit drowsy, like I'm about to tip off and fall. Don't worry, it won't happen. I've learned how to soldier on through all of that. Anything else is a real emergency. You must call the EMS. Colleagues, my name is Naledi Selebano and I work for the Commission for Gender Equality. I appreciate this opportunity to speak about feminism, womanism, and Bosadi. My initial thought when I was invited to come and speak at this occasion, I thought how typical of an institution of higher learning to encourage freedom of thought, by not giving me a specific topic, but rather broad thematic areas. But then I questioned, why did they include the term theorization or theorizing? Because after all, it is your role as academics to theorize. So I actually felt that it should be the other way around, that I should be sitting in your seat to learn and listen about these theories and how they apply to our lives in general. Not for me to give a keynote about that, but that's just on a lighter note. I have entitled this address, Institutionalizing Feminism, Womanism, Bosadi in South Africa, and I say from symbolism to substantive equality. I think that the institutionalization of feminism and womanism in South Africa must be understood as both a historical achievement and an ongoing project marked by tensions between symbolic commitments and material realities. At this critical juncture in our democratic trajectory, the central question that confronts policymakers, scholars, and practitioners alike is whether South Africa's progressive legal and institutional frameworks have translated into lived equality, particularly for women, or whether they remain largely symbolic in nature. As the country approaches the 70th anniversary of the 1956 Women's March, this question gains renewed energy. The march, led by over 20,000 women, predominantly Black women, was not only an act of resistance against apartheid past laws, but it was also an act of political imagination. Through the now iconic declaration, Wathinta Bafazi, Wathinta Mbokodo, though equally controversial in today's sense, as women are mostly contesting being associated with being called rocks, these women articulated a vision of a society in which women would not merely resist oppression, but would actively shape the institutions governing social, political, and economic life. Their struggle was thus not confined to representation, but extended to transformation, which is an aspiration that continues to define South Africa's gender equality project. Now, any meaningful discussion on the institutionalization of feminism, womanism, and Bosadi in South Africa must grapple with a critical historical political process, and that is the translation of the aspirations embedded in the Women's Charter into the very fabric of the post-apartheid constitution. This process is central to understanding why South Africa's constitution is often regarded as one of the most progressive and arguably feminist constitutional frameworks across the world. The Women's Charter, adopted in 1954 by the Federation of South African Women, was a foundational political document that articulated a vision of equality. It called for full citizenship for the rights of women, including equality before the law, access to education, employment opportunities, and participation in governance. Importantly, it recognized the interconnectedness of oppression, anticipating what we would now describe today as an intersectional framework. At a time when Black women were marginalized on the basis of gender, race, and class, the Charter asserted a radical claim, and that is, freedom in South Africa would be incomplete without the liberation of women. However, the Charter did not automatically translate into institutional reality. Its principles found renewed life in the late apartheid and early democratic periods through sustained activism by women's movements, civil society organizations, and political actors. The 1990s marked a critical turning point as women activists mobilized strategically to ensure that gender equality would not be treated as a peripheral concern in the constitutional negotiations, but as a central pillar of the new democratic order. One of the most significant mechanisms through which this translation occurred was the formation of the Women's National Coalition, also known as the WNC. The WNC brought together women from diverse political, social, and ideological backgrounds to articulate a unified set of demands during the constitutional drafting process. Through extensive consultations across the country, the coalition developed the Women's Charter for Effective Equality, a document that built upon the 1954 Charter, but adapted its principles to the contemporary context of democratic transformation. This process was profoundly important, and that is for two reasons. First is that it ensured that women's voices were not only present, but organized and influential within constitutional negotiations. Second, it shifted gender equality from being a moral aspiration to a set of concrete, actionable demands. These demands included the recognition of substantive equality, protection against discrimination, and the inclusion of socioeconomic rights, all of which would later become the defining features of the Constitution. The impact of these interventions is clearly visible in the 1996 Constitution in what we know as Section 9, which is also called the Equality Clause, that goes beyond a narrow conception of formal equality to embrace substantive equality. It is quite explicit in prohibiting discrimination on multiple grounds, including gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, sexual orientation, and others. The expansive approach reflects the influence of feminist and womanist thinking, which recognizes that inequality is structural and must be addressed through deliberate corrective measures. Moreover, the Constitution's inclusion of socioeconomic rights, such as access to housing, healthcare, food, water, social security, further reflects feminist insights into the material conditions of inequality, as feminist scholarship has long argued that legal equality alone is insufficient, especially if women remain economically marginalized. South Africa therefore adopted a framework that acknowledges the relationship between gender inequality and broader systems, particularly systems of poverty and exclusion, by embedding socioeconomic rights within the Constitution. Equally significant is the establishment of the institutional mechanisms to safeguard equality, particularly the creation of Chapter 9 institutions such as the Commission for Gender Equality. As the CGE, we have a constitutional mandate to promote, protect, and advance gender equality in the Republic, which represents a concrete institutional realization of the principles articulated in the Women's Charter. In this sense, the Constitution does not merely proclaim equality, but it also creates structures through which equality can be pursued and to some extent to be enforced. These features illustrate why South Africa is often regarded as a country with a constitution of a feminist character. However, it is also important to approach this characterization critically. To describe the Constitution as feminist is not to suggest that gender equality has been achieved, but rather that the constitutional framework provides the normative and institutional tools necessary for its realization. As feminist institutionalism reminds us, institutions can both challenge and reproduce inequality depending on how they are operationalized. This brings us back to the central tension that I seek to elucidate, and that is the gap between symbolism and substance. While the inclusion of the Women's Charter principles in the Constitution represents a significant victory for feminist activism, as the lived realities of women in South Africa demonstrate, constitutional commitments must be accompanied by sustained implementation, accountability, and transformation within all institutions of society. In this regard, the Women's Charter should not be understood as a historical artifact, but rather as a living political document, one that continues to guide and challenge the work of institutions such as the CGE. It serves as both a foundation and a benchmark, reminding us that the true measure of constitutional democracy lies not in the rights enshrined on paper, but in the extent to which those rights are realized in everyday lives of women. In the post-1994 era, there has been an intense focus on the establishment of gender-focused institutions, or the gender machinery, as we sometimes call it, including the CGE. We also have the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, which was previously known as the Office on the Status of Women. We also have the gender focal points within the state machinery. These developments signaled a deliberate effort to institutionalize justice by embedding gender equality within the architecture of governance. This process recognized that equality cannot be sustained through normative commitments alone, but that it requires concrete mechanisms such as legislation, policy frameworks, resource allocation, and oversight systems. Institutionalization in this context served to move gender justice from the margins of discourse into the center of governance. And without it, feminism risks remaining rhetorical, womanism risks being confined to lived yet undocumented experiences, and Bosadi risks existing as a rich philosophical tradition without structural impact. However, institutionalization is neither neutral nor inherently transformative. As feminist institutionalism reminds us, institutions are deeply gendered, shaped by historical power relations and embedded norms that can simultaneously enable as well as constrain change. As a result, institutions institutions may adopt the language of equality while continuing to reproduce gendered inequalities through their practices and cultures. Again, this tension in South Africa's lived experiences exists, in that despite a robust legislative and policy framework, significant disparities persist. Some women remain invisible as the system leaves them behind. Women in correctional facilities, for instance, face inadequate health care, gender-insensitive conditions, and limited reintegration support. They exist at the margins of both justice and gender discourse. Moreover, women remain disproportionately excluded from economic opportunities, with women's unemployment at approximately 35.9%, with only 35.8% of women being absorbed into employment, reflecting persistent labor exclusion. And it's important that I also mention that about 1.2 million women work in the informal sector, largely without protections. And over 51% of women in South Africa report having experienced gender-based violence. In the Eastern Cape, women own only about 26% of land, compared to 53% by men. And in Limpopo, women own about 33% of land, compared to 51% by men. And these are just but only examples. It is important that I emphasize that these numbers are not just abstract figures, but represent lived suffering. They represent systemic failure and institutional gaps. These figures are indicative of systemic gaps between policy commitments and implementation outcomes. In this regard, institutionalization without effective implementation does not constitute transformation, but rather amounts to performance. To address these limitations, it is necessary to interrogate the theoretical frameworks underpinning South Africa's gender project. While feminism has played a foundational role in challenging patriarchal structures and advancing equality, it has been critiqued, particularly within African contexts, for its tendency to universalize, I practiced this word, for its tendency to universalize women's experiences. Womanism emerges as a critical intervention in this regard, centering intersectional realities of Black women and foregrounding the interconnected nature of race, class, culture, and gender. It insists that gender justice must be rooted in the lived experiences and must account for the multiple and overlapping forms of oppressions faced by women. Bosadi theorizing further extend this critique by introducing a distinctly African decolonial perspective. It is rooted in African womanist thought and affirms the dignity, agency, and relational identity of African women while challenging the dominance of Eurocentric epistemologies in gender discourse. It emphasizes the concept of Mosadi as a complete and autonomous human being, regardless of marital or social status, and it situates gender within the broader cultural, communal, and historical context. In doing so, it offers a transformative framework for reimagining gender justice in ways that are both contextually relevant and epistemologically grounded. These are your terms, colleagues. One of the most significant obstacles to effective institutionalization remains the accountability gap. While gender equality is frequently invoked in policy statements, in conferences, and in public discourse, there is often a notable reluctance to enforce compliance and ensure measurable outcomes. Allow me to speak frankly. From the CGE perspective, when we conduct oversight, we usually encounter resistance, delayed responses, and limited cooperation. Yet when we are invited to speak, to present, or to train, our inboxes are often flooded. It gets worse in August when the gender equality agenda becomes limited to a calendar celebration by both public and private institutions, lacking meaningful impact. This contradiction is important because it tells us that we are comfortable with the language of gender equality, but not always with its accountability. In terms of the broader gender machinery, key issues include a gap between policy and implementation, with existing legislation often unenforced due to the lack of comprehensive enforcement mechanism. Additionally, fragmentation and weak coordination amongst us as the actors lead to inefficiencies and unclear responsibilities. To date, people confuse the mandate of the CGE and that of the Department of Women. The bureaucratization of the national gender machinery results in slow decision-making and a focus on administrative compliance rather than substantive outcomes. There are also issues of resources and capacity constraints that further limit the effectiveness of gender institutions, as gender work is often seen as peripheral and lacks adequate funding and expertise. The positioning of gender focal persons or gender focal points is also problematic, as they are usually in junior roles with very limited authority, which diminishes their impact on strategic planning and policy development. Further, there is a lack of accountability and ineffective monitoring mechanisms, making it difficult to assess progress on gender equality initiatives. Overall, the gender machinery struggles to drive meaningful systemic change due to these various constraints. We are therefore, colleagues, witnessing a structural crisis of institutionalization in South Africa. And the challenge, to be crudely honest, is that the machinery operates without sustained political power behind it. The challenges of institutionalization, though, are not confined to structures of the state. Institutions of higher learning, such as universities as yourselves, also play a critical role in shaping societal norms and power relations. However, evidence of persistent sexual harassment, sex for marks, exploitative practices, and inconsistent policy enforcement within these institutions highlights the need for a deeper cultural transformation. Universities, as sites of knowledge production and socialization, must move beyond formal policy commitments and actively dismantle entrenched systems of power and inequality. Furthermore, the evolving global context marked by a growing backlash against gender equality, or the global degendering agenda, encompassing resistance to gender mainstreaming, attacks on feminists and the LGBTQIA+, and attempts to dilute the gender discourse, signals a broader reassession of conservative power, particularly within our structures. And this underscores the fragility of the progress and the need for sustained vigilance in advancing gender equality. Reimagining institutionalization in South Africa therefore requires a renewed commitment to several key priorities. These include strengthening the gender machinery with adequate authority and resources, embedding intersectionality within policy frameworks, centering African feminist perspectives such as womanism and Bosadi, and shifting commitments from commitments to implementation. Madam Program Director, you interrupted me. And this should be done through measurable and monitored outcomes. Equally important is the cultivation of transformational leadership that is ethical, that is courageous, and responsive to the needs of communities. Now, in conclusion, the institutionalization of feminism, womanism, and Bosadi remains a critical yet incomplete project in South Africa. The legacy of 1956, particularly the march, serves as both a foundation and a challenge, reminding us that the struggle for gender justice is not about resisting oppression, and that the true measure of South Africa's democracy will not lie in the sophistication of its institutional frameworks, but in the extent to which these institutions materially improve the lives of women. To honor this legacy, It is imperative to move beyond symbolism and commit to the realization of substantive equality, ensuring that no woman remains invisible in the pursuit of gender justice. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Naledi, for the thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure at this point we all have questions that are running in our heads that we are going to discuss with our presenters. But I'll ask that we keep our questions to the end. I'm going to bring on stage the panelists that will have discussions. Trust me, they won't take so much of your time. Each of them will be having 5 minutes to also give their input on the topic of discussion for today, and then we will take questions at the end. So at this stage, I would like us to welcome our panelists. First on the list, we have Dr. Mtlongo on stage. Will you please come up? We all from the Department of Correctional Management, the College of Law. We also have Dr. Shabane from the Department of Police Practice from the College of Law. We also have Dr. Mnguni from the Department of Criminology and Security Sciences, College of Law. We also have Ms. Nyau from the Department of Jurisprudence. And lastly, we'll have Prof. Mudau to also join the stage from the Public, Constitutional, and International Law Department. And lastly, Ms. Lauze to join this. Mulauze to join the panelists. Thank you so much. So we're going to start as the program reads. So we'll start firstly with a presentation from Dr. Mtlongo. Thank you. You can come here. I think the mic, is it far from you?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope everyone is doing well. I would like to first disclaim that if I shake, it's because I'm nervous. It's not because I'm ill or I took medication. You guys just intimidate me. Happy to be here today, and I will quickly present on what I prepared for today, as the instruction indicated that I should be 2.5 minutes on this stage so that I can give my colleagues a chance. So the presentation I'm going to present today was brought about a call that I got from my mother a year ago. She said, open quotes, "Mtanam, i-extortion ifikile." And she is a woman who is in the rural areas. So I was taken aback by what she meant, that extortion ifikile or protection fee ifikile. So the paper that I wrote investigated how women in the rural areas, who are mostly heading some of the households there, are coping or navigating the pandemic that has now gotten into the rural Eastern Cape villages and towns such as Mqhekezeni, Inqamakwe, Etsomo. I was interested into finding out how they are dealing with extortion or protection fee, how they have tried to report, or rather how they have tried to mitigate or curb some of these demands from the extortionists, because I know that most of the households they were told to pay a fee depending on how many household members live in the house, or how big the house is, how beautiful and fenced, how much livestock they have. So I was in the question of what is being presented this week, where women seem to be in the brink of transformation. I'm here before you. I've infiltrated a little bit institutions of higher learning. So with that, which is a good story to tell, there are some women in the same South Africa that are living a different reality. And for them, this is their everyday life. So the question that frames this presentation is, therefore, not whether South Africa is transformed. The deeper question is, which women have been allowed to experience transformation, and which women are still waiting for it to arrive in their doorsteps? So one would ask, in villages, there are no prominent businessmen. So who is extorting these women? It's because of other factors that played a ripple effect on what is happening in the villages. Most of the youth that we have today is unemployed. Unfortunately, men or young males are in the villages unemployed. They couldn't go to universities. So these women stay with them in these villages. So because the stomach has no feelings, they have now turned to extorting and making money off of these vulnerable women. I was practicing vulnerable because I feel like I'm too fast when I pronounce the word, and it can be difficult for me. So as I've aforementioned, that the person, or the people rather, that are victimizing these women are not strangers to them, but rather people that they raised, people that have been, they know their families, their grandfathers. It's not outsiders. We know that villages in the Eastern Cape, KZN, some in Limpopo are homogeneous in that they don't have a mix of different people. So whoever's causing chaos and trouble is, or must be, someone who is from that community. I will quickly jump to what I borrowed from psychology, which is the state that these women find themselves in. And this is the learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a theory in psychology which was developed to explain the repeated exposure to uncontrollable harm, which can lead individuals to believe that their actions will not change the situation. So I will disclaim that I understand positionality in research, but I'll go back to my mother's phone call when she was telling me what's happening. She was not telling me that protection fee ifikile because she was not going to pay it when they needed her to pay, but rather she was telling me that this is something that's here now. Other villages before our village have been paying, and now it's our turn. Maybe you must budget kancinci so that you can also make do so we pay it and not find ourselves casted out or being victimized. So that process of how my mother thought about dealing with the protection fee that's happening, that in psychology is called learned helplessness. She is not only accepting what is happening, but she understands that when she looks around, there's really nothing that she can do that can better the situation, which is a very difficult state to live under as a woman in today's South Africa. When people experience repeated failure, punishment, fear, or powerlessness. They may stop trying to escape even when the form of help becomes available. Because this side, I'm in Pretoria, I'm like, why don't you report, go to the chief and tell them that this is happening. So this is me here and not there. And it's not being able to relate with the circumstances that they have there. I think I am coming with a form of them to escape, but rather what is happening for them there is a different reality like we are trying to talk about today. So the theory is used to understand psychological and behavioral consequences of repeated victimization among rural women who are exposed to extortion, threat, poverty, and the weak institutional protection. So because other villages before my villages, which is very far ahead, have had or have been paying. So my mom said, no, we knew it would eventually come to us one day, which is a very sad reality, like I've aforementioned, because there have been talks of extortion, especially when it was prominent in 2024. It was spoken about in Parliament, but there's no real responses that are tangible for some of the women that are in these deep hidden corners, like the rural areas of Eastern Cape and KZN. I'll quickly run to I'll mix the theory and what we are dealing with, the theme today. A Bosadi lens in this context deepens the land helplessness theory by placing women's dignity, identity, and social position at the center of the analysis. So land helplessness explains the psychological impact of repeated victimization, while Bosadi explains how victimization wounds African womanhood, motherhood, family life, and communal belonging. So these two do intersect at some point. The land helplessness theory to the womanist theorization. Womanist theorization challenged the idea that rural women who remain silent or continue paying protection fee are powerless. Womanism asks of us to look at survival as a form of resistance. Rural women may resist in quiet and informal ways, such as warning other women that it's coming now, because it didn't just get to them. They had someone told someone, and then someone told someone, protecting children, sharing information, forming support networks, maybe having a stokvel, using churches and women's group, and negotiating safety under dangerous conditions. So I will quickly conclude because my time is up. I can see there I have 1 minute. So this paper argues today that victimization of rural women cannot be understood through the legal and criminal justice frameworks alone. It requires a feminist, African-centered, and culturally sensitive reading that recognizes women's lived experiences, their spiritual and communal identities, and their labor within families. The Bosadi and the womanist theorization provide such a framework because they place African women's dignity, survival, rationality, motherhood, community responsibility, and the resistance at the center of its analysis. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mlungu, for that wonderful presentation. We'll now call on the next panelist, Dr. Shabane, to come on stage. Thank you.
Program Director, Prof. Manamela, college and friends, friends of the college, afternoon. Okay. We, distinguished guest Ausi Naledi. Me, thank you for the presentation. As we reflect on the talk you delivered to us, based on the mini preparation I had, majority of the deliverance you said to us, it is within here, of which is, yeah, of which is in responding to your address, me. It is very important that, be it outside the academic space or within the academic space, it is very important that we do understand that to a certain extent, I will say there were fortresses that women had. Or those fortresses are no longer here. But majority of women's, they claim or they still think the fortresses are still there. I'm saying this because looking at the now, of which this is very important to look at the current era. Yes, what had happened, but then now we are transforming. We are still transforming. Despite that, we are within the democratic environment, but the transformation is still there. In highlighting to the equality of which is you have addressed us about. It is very important, one, to take into consideration that looking at the Chapter 9 institution, for example, yes, the Chapter 9 institutions, we are being represented by women there. And we are appreciating the representation that they are having. As we are appreciating and they are being representing us constitutionally, because as we have highlighted, it has been derived in one of the feminists that happened in 18, you said, ma'am, it's 18, the Women's Charter, yes, of which is the Chapter 9 institution. That is where women's are being dominated there. I stand to be corrected. I don't recall ever since we've received a democracy within that institution being represented by another person or another gender in particular. So it is very important to recognize and understand that. And where necessary and where it need be, yes, a knowledge and an information, you cannot say you have acquired it and you will no longer need it. It's an up-to-date information that one need to get. It is very important that if and where necessary, they seek information to another person or to a male person in particular. Such information cannot be, I will say, be gatekept. So we do recognize your existence and your presence within the leadership structures and within the academic structures. And also, another example, we've highlighted politically related examples when it's come to women emancipation. I will make an example with the Speaker of the Parliament. On its own, by the virtue that we are being represented by a woman there, that means a lot. That means a lot, and we should not look down upon that. It is very important that fortress, we are removing it, and we are still transforming based on the activities that women are engaging themselves on. Yes, we cannot shy away that in one way or another, We cannot shy away that in one way or another, there are challenges in place. But those challenges, there are also solutions. So it is very important that we cooperate and be informative and be open on the things that you guys doesn't, if I'm saying you guys, I'm not like separating outright us. Because by the virtue that we are here also, it means that we are part and parcel and we are recognizing what is happening within what we so-called the struggle, of which is, for us, it's not a struggle per se. So the information is there and we need to be open to one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shabane, for that presentation. We'll now welcome on stage Ms. Mulwazi.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Nokonwaba Mnguni. Sorry, I stood up too quickly. I think I'm a bit excited. So our guest speaker, because we're in an academic space, I want to say I'm a big supporter of her work, but in actual fact, I want to say I'm a fan. Sorry. So our guest speaker colleagues touched on a very important reality, which is the gap between symbolism and substance. So with that being said, I want to build on that key statement by touching on one of the spaces where there's a gap in the correctional system regarding Black female offenders. The absence of feminism, womanism, and intersectionality, as well as within the institutionalization of the criminal justice system, particularly the correctional system, creates concerning risks in the lives of Black female offenders who reintegrate back into the society. Colleagues, South Africa's correctional system is built around the reality of a specific offender. And for a while, that has been the male offender as well as their lived experiences and realities. Female incarceration, female offenders, and the factors that come with that reality have been largely overlooked. So when a Black female offender exists into that system, she does so not only carrying the stigma of a criminal record, but as well as the community structures that are built against her, the economic marginalization, and in many cases, existing trauma experiences. So I say this, colleagues, that it is unfortunate that the correctional system, in a lack of a better word, expects these women to reintegrate into a society that never really included them by using tools that is designed by a system that never really saw them, or rather sees them. So my research in particular looks into the post-carceral lived experiences of formerly incarcerated Black women. And this is not a study that simply focuses on reintegration as a procedural manner, but it includes a feminist and a intersectional lens. In the South African context, with all our experiences of past history, or some can say even current history and realities, we cannot look at intersectionality as a single lens. Like our guest speaker already touched on, there are various aspects such as gender, class, as well as culture. And these are lived very much simultaneously and are compounded with one another. And this is where the Busadi framework becomes not just only relevant, but very much necessary. This is because it speaks directly in the specific reality of Black South African female offenders in a way that Western feminist perspectives do not. This lens reveals that reintegration failure is not a personal failure in the perspective of female offenders, but also in the Constitution and the system. The institutionalization of Musadi is not complete until it reaches the women who have been incarcerated, stigmatized, and forgotten. In closing, colleagues, I would like to advocate with my very early research, but I believe will be very much impactful, is that conscious implementation of feminist and intersectional feminism is how reintegration is continued and delivered. It should not be looked at as an add-on, but as a foundation. When we begin to center the full humanity and complexity and realities of these female offenders, we then create the conditions of reintegration processes that can actually be successful. Thank you so much.
That was an excellent timing from your side, Doc. Thank you so much. All right, we'll now call on stage our next panelist, Ms. Mulazi. Take a stage.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Prof. Manamela and colleagues and Mena Lady. You touched on a topic that is close to my heart. I remember when I was standing outside with colleagues, we were speaking about, as an academic writer, you should not be too emotional sometimes, so I hope I don't get too emotional. You spoke of that more than 30% of women are part of the informal sector, and they then are vulnerable. While we've got many legislations, such as the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and the Employment Equity Act, women still remain marginalized and vulnerable in the economic sector. I'll make reference to my paper, which is titled, The Feminization of Poverty and Labor, Exploring Women's Economic Vulnerability in the South African Labor Sector. This was then sparked by a colleague who's in the Department of Economics when she spoke about unpaid labor. Let me ask you guys just a few questions. How many of you have helpers? What is it that you pay your helper? Are you aware of the minimum wage and what it stipulates? For those that don't have helpers, in a household where there are many adults, who then does the domestic work? If everybody's coming back from work, who then has to face the domestic work in the household? Would you say that then that amounts to unpaid labor? While others may then progress, the one that is faced with the domestic work may not progress with whatever career path that they want because they are faced with other jobs that they need to do within the household. Just ask yourself those questions. These are phenomena that are real within our society. I will touch on domestic workers. This is an industry that is one of the most vulnerable. Most of them are not protected, and they're not even aware of what protection that they need to receive. We have the Mahlangu case, which did try to make certain strides. So in this case, the court then recognized the gendered economic vulnerability. The Constitutional Court then declared the exclusion of domestic workers from the quota unconstitutional. If your domestic worker gets injured at work, they were never covered, but this case then changed that. However, many of them still then remain vulnerable in the economic sector. There are no legislations that protect them. While some of us have Section 6, subsection 4 of the Employment Equity Act that protects us and also speaks for same work, same pay for the same work. While some of us have that luxury to invoke that, domestic workers don't. Who then protects an ordinary domestic worker? These are the gaps that have been there within our labor legislations. There's no way that there's no systems that have been created to follow up. Yes, it's pretty on paper. We have stated that the national minimum wage needs to be this, but who is there to check that these are actually being implemented? And that is where most gaps then lay in our labor law legislations. We put so much on paper. There are so many sections that we can go through, yet they all fall short because there is no implementation. Mena Lady, you also just in closing, you also spoke of leaders that are no longer there. Lilian Goni, Albertina Sisulu, just to name a few, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Charlotte Macele. They've paved the way, but they are no longer there. Now we are seeing rise of new leaders, such as Jancita Zuma, and sorry for the pronunciation, who are then taking paths to ensure that feminization then does not die, but is still there. And we cannot just leave it upon them, but it is also upon us, every individual, to ensure that we also take strides, to ensure that we enforce feminism in all aspects of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maluzi. Thank you for the thought-provoking presentation and also for keeping time without even me reminding you of your time. So I'm sure with this presentation, I'm sure we have questions that are bubbling in our minds, in our heads. But let's just keep writing them down, and yeah, in a few minutes from now, I think we'll get into that session where we get to pour out what is in our mind. So allow me to call our next presenter, Ms. Nyao, on stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. They say that grief and loss change you, but rape changed sisterhood for life after my sister was raped. The feminist slogan that the private is personal rings true here. So today, my reflections will be on an African feminist legal theory on violence against women. After 1994, South Africa has experienced an extensive growth in the body of scholarly work on gender justice. My reflections today center on African feminist framework, particularly those that have prioritized gender-based violence and femicide. Presently in South Africa, legal and human rights discourse where violence of a sexual nature has been committed against women, dominance and cultural feminisms remain influential, with African feminism remaining under-theorized. Yet there is a need for context-specific feminist legal frameworks that capture South Africa's distinct position that has been shaped by years of secular colonial expansion, racial capitalism, and apartheid. African feminist insights could also prove resourceful for an ameliorative gender justice on violence against women. The gains that have been attained from what Rosalind Dixon called insights of older feminist theories, which have greatly influenced the concept of gender equality, should be taken just as seriously as recent feminist theories that seek to address the racial sexual wound of the colony. Such frameworks could add meaningful and substantive shifts on the already existing feminist explanations of violence against women. The depth and complexity of African feminist theory can be drawn upon to enrich and influence the current jurisprudence on violence against women. Even though there is skepticism on the ability of law to effect feminist change,
Critical race feminists, for example, regard law and rights as capable of challenging marginalization and subordination. The concept of substantive equality, already explored in depth by Catherine Albertine, Kirin Zweku, and Karen Van Male, could be built upon to engage in depth with violence against women. Albertine, for example, has proposed an idea of a transformative equality of condition that builds on the concept of substantive equality. She has suggested how we might reinterpret constitutional equality within a transformative approach by moving through and beyond a dignity-based concern with social inclusion and sufficiency towards an idea of systemic and material justice. The idea could be explored further in rape, particularly to dismantle epistemic ignorance and silences around the rapes of African women in the past and present. Siva Tamale has also contributed immensely on African sexuality at the intersection of culture and human rights, leaving the space open to further explore intimate partner violence affecting women living under customary law. Another perspective could draw from feminist work on the racial sexual wound of the colony, paying particular attention to rape. It could draw from the scholarly feminist works of Amina Mama, Amanda Hose, Louise Dutoy, Pumla Qola, Azile Kutsie, and Habiba Baderun. These works underscore the racial sexual wound of the colony by examining colonial histories embedded in sexual violence, highlighting racialized dimensions of rape and gender harm. This important aspect of rape remains underdeveloped in South African feminist legal scholarship. In closing, African feminist frameworks provide a powerful standpoint from which a distinct legal theory on violence against women can emerge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mlazi. Thank you for the time. Sorry. Ms. Nyau, beg your pardon. Thank you so much for that thought-provoking and also emotional presentation. And yeah, I think I will get one or two things to discuss after this. But let's welcome our last speaker, panelist on stage while we prepare for our question. Prof. Mudau, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, as part of a reflection of Ms. Naledi's presentation, she did indicate that currently in our society, there is a conflation or a confusion between the roles, responsibilities, or even the functions of the Department of Women, as well as the role of the Commission for Gender Equality. So my issue now is the fact that women who reside in rural areas are generally deemed to be the most vulnerable as opposed to those who reside in urban areas. And the fact that when you look at this Catholic niche area of feminist women and Busadi theorizations, especially the aspect of Busadi theorizations, it's more in terms of ensuring that there is an African traditional, indigenous-centered approach in terms of resolving the challenges that women face. And in reality, much of our indigenous knowledge systems, they reflect the lived realities, the experiences of people who live in rural areas, how they share intergenerational learning and practices, community practices. It rotates within these rural areas. And the question is, if Busadi theorization is to be effective in terms of changing the social, political, and economic aspirations and even progress of women, especially those in rural areas, where is the convergence or divergence of these? Because indigenous knowledge systems, they often function through power dynamics, where there is traditional roles that are generally patriarchal in nature, which marginalizes women. How do we then break the cycle of disadvantage of women in rural areas? Ms. Naledi, you indicated as part of your introductory remarks that we gave you a role that requires you to also unpack part of theorization. And you said this is a role that is generally confined to universities or researchers or academics. So I want to differ slightly with you because if you look at the role which you currently hold, I think you're the head of research, right? Yeah, deputy head of research. And I don't think your research is actually meant to be conducted in vacuum, but it needs to broadly incorporate the course and scope of issues that strangle or encroach on gender equality, even issues that will deal with women's rights, gender empowerment, gender mainstreaming, and gender justice. So if we are to only regard your role in terms of leading in terms of research as something that is only confined to academic institutions, I think it will be slightly limiting or significantly so. And on the other side, what I need to also indicate is the fact that if you are to address issues that encroaching on the rights of women with disabilities, especially those who also live in rural areas, you can see that the nature of their disadvantage is far much more worse as opposed to those who are bodily able and also residing in urban areas. So for you to infuse their lived realities, especially if they emanate from what they have experienced in rural areas, that's a form of a theory that has to be incorporated fully, and you have to present, solution-based approaches to these. Yeah. Thank you so much. I believe I'm within 5 minutes. All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that swift presentation and also putting out more questions there. Today we've heard from our panelists how they have touched on policies, on women protection in regards to the implementation on the ground. They've identified a couple of gaps, ranging from the Correctional Service Department as well as from the Labor Department. So now we'll be opening the floor for questions so that we can discuss more on those things that we have in mind. We will be having 20 minutes for question and answers, and yes, we can actually start. Yes, Prof. You can use your mic. You can use your mic on my right.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
Chair, can I start by just calling an order? There's this thing of giving question and answers very few minutes. And because you started late, I'm not sure how you are going to compensate us for that because we were here on time. And you did not even apologize for starting late. Now you are making us rush into question and answers as if we did not have dedicated time and issues to raise. I just wanted to make clear that you can't be late and then tell us about 20 minutes after really you were so late. Chair, I want to raise a critical question about something that people tend to celebrate. The August 9, 1956 movement. My question is that have people investigated why white women marched on that day? What was the demand from white women? And I want to put it here for the record, Chair, without fear or favor. White women were marching because their black women servants were not being allowed by the Apartheid Group Areas Act to be in urban areas at the time they should be serving them. Now, we tend to conflate that this was a uniform movement. No. White women were not marching so that there's equality between them and black women. They were marching for their domestic workers to be allowed to be in urban centers and continue to work and take care of their children while they were pursuing their career. That is why that movement never went into the 60s to request that black women vote in the 60s when white women were expected to vote. Two, Chair, is to move on the notion that there's uniformity on this concept of feminism. That feminism, it's why it's the same. Black women have a mother and child-like relationship with white women, where the white woman is like a mother to the black woman who thinks and tells them what is good for them, and a black woman with a colonial mind and glasses is a problem. I'll make an example with what Ms. Nyao was saying. She locates her argument correctly in South Africa as a settler colonial state, where the oppression of black women was not separate from the oppression of black men. Black men and black women were excluded as black people. Now, in the course of this struggle and debate, we tend to make a mistake of debating, and black women make that mistake, of debating as if when they were fighting for their rights, black men were sitting in a tavern enjoying themselves. It is not correct, Chair. It is not correct, and it must be stated for the record. I'll make an example on how a black woman with colonial sunglasses is very dangerous. UCT had Mampela Rampela as a VC, a professor who served in the IMF and globally recognized as an academic. Did transformation progress when Mampela Rampela was there? No. In fact, the conditions of black people in UCT became worse. And there was regression in terms of employment of black academics. Ms. Pakeng is the other one, a black woman in charge of a university in Cape Town. Under her watch, instead of black South African academics being employed, and men in particular, we saw an endemic employment of Africans from the continent, from Ghana, Congo, Nigeria, and who then got a citizenship into that space. Did it mean progress for black South African men who were objects of settler colonial oppression? You have white black women in power, but black communities that we advocate for do not benefit. Now you have black people that are excluded by black women in society as if black men have never played a role. And I'll make the last example. If you look at the statistics of apartheid hanging in South Africa, there's no single white woman who was hanged for fighting apartheid. There's no single white woman who disappears at the hands of apartheid security police. But you have Ms. Simelan, who vanished and was kidnapped in Johannesburg by apartheid agents. That is, whilst white women experience the fruits of racial discrimination, black women experienced the harshest form of apartheid brutality. They were hanged, they were tortured in flat plus, and they were even killed. My submission, Chair, is to say, let's not try and create this artificial commonness, which we really exposed to. I can point to many examples. Women experience the greatest form of oppression in the hands of women. Most domestic workers in this country remain black, and worse, Basotho women are new slaves in the hands of black middle-class women. So it has nothing to do with race or gender. No, you have black women being themselves perpetuating the most exploitative form of oppression and economic subjugation on Basotho women, including the refusal, as my colleague points it, the refusal to pay minimum wages as determined by legislation. And therefore, I'm saying, Chair, as a contribution, let us be consistent and let's locate the debates, especially around critical race and gender, in the nature of South Africa. Let's not become cosmetic. The Americans are saying it is nice. The British are saying it is nice. We repeat it and mimic it. I'm saying let's debate and engage, but say the reality of black women and African people in particular in South Africa is different from the reality of black people in Botswana, in any other country in the continent, and are not uniquely them, but also we must really reflect on them correctly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Panelists, is there anyone that would like to add on the contribution of Prof before we move to the next question? Just press.
We are so poor at the commission, we don't have these technologies. Firstly, I appreciate the engagement from Prof, though the tone is quite intimidating. I did not get that, Chair. Okay, thank you, Mo African Pomokaba. You had not introduced yourself as such.
Okay, thank you.
But I take exception to your tone. It is quite violent, and as a black woman sitting here who wishes to engage intellectually, I do not want to find myself feeling like I do not belong or that my input is rubbish, and that to be scolded not even like a child, because children have rights and they must be treated as human beings. But my response to you
No,
is
check it,
that,
I call order. I think my colleagues in the College of Law and really can attest to the fact that this is how I speak. And I take exception to that I'm speaking in a condescending tone to any person. I'm assertive, I'm very clear, I'm an activist. I would not want anybody to think that my tone is demeaning towards them. That's why I'm addressing now, Chair, so that there's no misconception on victimhood on the side of any person. That's how I speak. My colleagues know, and I want us to keep it that way. Because she does not know me, she might read things into my tone that don't exist, really. Thank you.
are you still in charge of the meeting, Chair?
Yes, I am.
Okay, do you give me the
Yes.
opportunity to respond?
Carry on, Doc.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say the reflections have been insightful and of course provoke us to think beyond where we are and what has been shared here today. And of course, the time is limited. If we're speaking about feminism and womanism and Bosadi, we can take the whole day. Because firstly, we do not agree as women in terms of what that means. But why should we? Do men always agree about their political stances? Why do we have all these political parties that were established by men? They differ in terms of ideology. So why, when it comes to women, there's an expectation that we must always agree, and it is the basis of that agreement that will give substance to our cry, one. Two, the woman on woman violence, it does exist. But why are we shying away from admitting that there is men on women violence? It's not a competition. And the fact that we are saying in the room that the burden for this gender discourse must fall on women is sexist. It is sexist. It is not the fight or the battle of women alone to ensure that there's women's emancipation. It is unfair to demand transformation, results, and numbers from black women, but we don't hold men to the same account. How many VCs are men? And what transformation agenda have we sought? How have we scrutinized them deeply to say, what have they brought for us? Basotho women, where are the men if we are saying it's women who are oppressing them in their families? Where are they? What are the percentages around black female-headed households that lack a male figure? So why must the woman carry that burden? But I'm not there. Mine is not an argument about men and women. It's not a versus. And this adds on to a question that was alluded to earlier around the Chapter 9 institution, especially the CGE, having been predominantly represented in leadership by women. It is the evolution. The institution itself was advocated for by black women.
It is women who said, you will not sit and discuss this constitution, but not have this body. But of course, we are living in contemporary South Africa. And what remains important is for us to evolve, and we are evolving. Maybe not at the speed that men wish, because internally we also have architectural politics, like you do in Unisa. You are not squeaky clean. You do not have one ideology that everybody agrees on. So at CGE, we have different ideas also about which course we should be taking forward. And sometimes we are at loggerheads, whether we should take forward issues of men or not, but we have. If you look at our gang study, if we look at our study wherein we look at men's rights as fathers who are being denied rights to access to their children, if you look at the illegal circumcision schools, that is us centering men's voices, because it's not an us versus them. We're a constitutional body. And for us, it is important that as South Africa, we move towards one vision that is articulated. And of course, it sounds cosmetic. And we also have our own personal politics that say, are you always aligned so much to the Constitution? Sometimes we question ourselves whether we agree with this format, whether we agree that this is the way to go. But my parting shot is that it is unfair for women to always be expected to agree when nobody else is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc, for that. We'll take the next hand.
No, thank you, Chair. I think for me, I take an issue with is the fact that often the discussion on the question of gender, right, which serves as an expression of an oppressive relations of social reproduction of society, are not located in the political economy of society that create that oppressive relation. And that is society based on exploitation, and of course, or reproduce itself on the basis of, exploitation and gendered, racialized, and all forms of oppressions that, of course, create all these questions and so on. And I think, and that sort of made the discussion abstract. Because if you have to ask everybody, right, I think in this day and age, should women be oppressed? I don't think anybody, very few people will still say, no, yes, they should be, right? But why is it that women continue to be oppressed? Why is it that they continue to be brutalized? Why is it that they're suffering violence? And ultimately, we have got to say, what is it that is in the anatomy of this society that makes it impossible for us to be able to overcome that? And I think conversations on feminism, for me, has got to be able to deal with that. For a research at the Gender Equality Commission, for instance, we've got to be saying, what will be, like the cost of women that are doing a free laundry in society, right? Free clothing, through, cooking, and all these services that are rendering, which should be and ought to be the cost of the social reproduction of labor, right? Because reality is, a discussion about economy has got to be about that, right? When we say the system is working, the fact of the matter is, when we say the value of the worker, these are wages workers are supposed to be getting. We are supposed to be saying, who is doing laundry for these workers, right? Who is doing cooking for these workers? Who is doing cleaning and all? That is hundreds of billions of worth of free labor that is the basis for perpetuation of gender relations that create this oppression and that perpetuate the violence that we see. And I don't think our discussion on communism, on feminism, the research that is going on in the spaces on the part of the Commission speaks to quantification as to how is the ruling class and elite that owns the economy and, of course, the land in this country benefits from perpetuation of this oppressive gender relation. And lastly, Chair, is, again, how then do we ground, right? This conversation and about solutions on the realities, because I think women, like all other historical subjects, we can't just treat them as an object of study, of pity, and all the things and so on, right? How are we engaging with working class communities in rural areas that we're referring to and all those things and so on? And how are they engaging with these questions themselves in their organization so that conversations at level of university, at level of the commission, and wherever these spaces where this discussion takes place are actually rooted on those concrete realities, but also contribute to solutions. For a college of law like ours, right? Are we having centers and putting our law students, our law academics in supporting rural movements and organizations, of women in rural areas that are battling land dispossessions, issues of eviction from their houses, disinheritance, but also gender commissions of many trade unions and other. I'm just saying that women are not just victims, right? Black working class women have been organizing, they've been fighting, but so are other women and so on. But lots of these conversations are taking place as if those struggles are not there, there's no organizations, there are no movements, and therefore we are not contributing to anything of any substance that concretely can uplift the people in terms of addressing those issues and the issues behind these issues that we are dealing with of gender-based violence that are catastrophic in many of the Black working class communities.
Thank you so much for your question. Panelists, will you want to add to, okay, Doc?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prof.
No, I'm just a minister.
You didn't choose.
Comrade. That is okay. Thank you. This is very important that at first we need to understand these three terms, that even though they look like one, but they are intersectionally, if one might say. We need to understand the aspect of feminism. We need to understand the aspect of womenism. We need to understand also the aspect of Bosati. Before me, I'm having a table that I've created some few aspects. So in order for us to theorize these terms, it is very important that an individual who has a mentality or an understanding of a feminist doesn't confuse or conflict the feminist mentality or the feminist education or doings with the Bosati or womanist. Because when it's come to, for example, the key concern, these three, they are different in their concern. And it is very important that we start here within the education sector as well as the institution where Ausinaledi is coming from, even though it is a private institution, but it can make a difference, because I'm thinking of a person who's coming from a marginalized society, a person from deep rural area. So it becomes difficult if you can go to that environment and say, no, I'm here to inform you guys about the feminist, I'm here to inform you about the womanist or the Bosati. So listening to the discussion, majority of the discussions, if I can associate, they are emanating from the Bosati elements or aspects. So it is very important that we start here and disseminate the information. Because if we will start here pointing fingers to one another, it's where we will start to having not having a good or a proper solution in ensuring that there is a change for the oppression that we've seen or we've proclaimed it's happening to women. So let us first have an understanding of these three and be able to apply it where it's applicable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Quick one from my side, Doc.
Yes, very quick one. Yes,
Miss-
my lady.
sorry, Miss
Not
Lady.
Doc yet. A lot has been said. My first question, especially to the men who decided to come and join this discussion, is what is your specific stance? What are your interests in this room? That's just a question for you to ponder on. You can answer, you may not, it's still fine. But I want to engage with you, Mr. I like your contributions and they're correct, but I want to update you that we have done work on access to land, particularly in rural areas. And we have looked into what impact that has on women, especially the socioeconomic experiences of women and their families. So issues of land oppression, of course, very important as a discourse for us to have. As a country, for a long time, we've had it with just the lens of race. But we've seen as the CGE that when we dig deeper, practices that we know to be of a long time ago, such as a woman being a minor, you cannot on your own go knock on the chief's door and say, I need a piece of land. You still must be accompanied by a man. And some of these women would pick a man up from the street just to say, go and represent me. Those practices are still there. So, of course, we need to have a multi-layered discussion around that, and we shouldn't shy away from speaking on issues of land. But the aspect that I really want to answer you on is around quantification. Very important, and that's why in my openings I said we exist not necessarily to debate around theories. That's very important, it's fundamental to our work. We are a product of these theories. But fundamentally, we are at policy level. It's a different type of research. And that's where we embed ourselves. But it is not to say that theory is not important. Because for me, as I sit here, questions that are raised about the commission are not the three types of theories, but it's about how do you quantify? What does the policy say? Labor laws. The many issues that have come up here are important for the CGE to carry forward, and not just debates around are you Basadi, are you this, at what level, at what extent. So I just wanted to say that. We do have studies that seek to quantify. We have now what we're working on, the gender, the GBV, what's it, index, a measure of GBV that we think should be reliable, because currently we know that the current data sets are not the best for us as a country. So we are making strides, colleagues. But the criticisms we do take, we are a thinking institution. We welcome any type of criticism and we're always willing to engage. Let me leave it there, Chair, but I wanted to say we are making strides in terms of quantifying.
Thank you so much, Ms. Naledi. I think there's a hand here. Yes, Doc.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much, panelists, for eye-opening us in issues of women and feminism. Well, I appreciate because there are strands of feminism which have been evolving. And now we have reached this Bosadi because it now focuses on black women. So now, which means it's a categorization of women, which we're saying they are not really accessing generally what other women are accessing. So we need to focus on Bosadi, on black women in South Africa. But now, there are other issues now that hinders this agenda, which emanate from other laws. Because South Africa is, in terms of the law, most of the things they have tried to match, to remove this gender inequality. But for example, there's a student that I'm co-supervising who's studying on the teenage pregnancy. So you realize that at the age of 16, girls
can consent to sex. But when it comes to buying a house, they are regarded as minors. So how far does it go to affect a black child who's there and then he's been taken advantage of, he's 16, and now we want to build up this black woman to move forward. Already, because she's black, because of this categorization, we're appreciating that this intersection of womanhood and probably sexuality, but basically the color as well. And it will also come even a class in that regard, because they may not be having that access to reproductive rights. But at the same time, like while in the schools, they are teaching life orientation in that aspect. 16 years, can they consent? How does it affect them in the long run? That's my comment or my point of, worry. And because if you're allowing them to have sex, it's their rights, but they don't have a right to buy a house. They don't have a right to do other legal, all those legal transactions that you may know. So this one is probably you are regarding it as a social aspect or as a relational aspect, but how far does it go to affect this agenda that we have? We want to help the Busadi woman, the black woman. And then the last take that I have is in the developing, there's an emerging strand of womanism, which now saying the transformation of feminism is no longer couched in having women representation, neither is it couched in having them in their participation. But in the leaguers that they are living, they are building a leadership leaguers, which is different from the patriarchal leadership, which we need in the society to tackle the challenges that the society is facing. Not only focusing on making women helping another woman or not making women standing there and say we are activists, no. But that leaguers that they are living, are we taking note of that? Because when a woman is leading, there is that mothering, that caring, that involving, that horizontal aspect, that engaging. So are we taking that into account? And now, if we are noticing that, are we cascading it to men? Because we are leaving men out. A woman is struggling to find a space in a male environment, despite how much equipped you are. Right now, we know our rights, but take me back home in my raw area. I stand there, I need to wrap my trousers, I need to bow down, Why? Because men are now left behind in this kind of women leadership that we have. So we're going to have, like now South Africa is, the last cabinet, it was almost 50, right? Like in the SADC region, it was the highest with women. But that's the number, right? What about the impact itself? Even in the society, there was a time when I was taking a text, you will be asked, you are a woman, why do you want to sit in front? A simple issue like that, it goes far route to realize how far are we engaging? Because I heard men saying that they are even infiltrating in the circumcision schools. Whether they are informal or formal, my point is to say, may they not be dismantled, but may they be transformed to take care of these issues, that there must be a course that after having done their traditional things, then a human rights aspect comes in and a feminism kind of aspect comes in. So that when they come from there, they are not only taught to be men, but they are also taught to appreciate women. And yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll take the next question in the middle, and then the last one at the tail end. Thank you.
Good day, everybody. Thank you very much for the contributions. I don't have a question, luckily for you. Now, I only got a contribution. They might come from a question, but even academia, not everything has to be answered sometimes. So Doc, she left. She was speaking about the issue of Eastern Cape, and there's a point she mentioned that most of the issues that they are facing in Eastern Cape, they are emanated from young men who did not make it or did not manage to go to the universities. And I think we could ask ourselves as to why. Because there are various programs that are rolled out the country for young women empowerment. But how much of those programs do we have for those young men? Why am I putting this? Because feminist does tell us that we seek information, we empower the most vulnerable individuals. Those young men too, yes, they are vulnerable. Why? Because they did not make it to go to university. Some of them didn't even finish high school, right? They dropped through the cracks of the institution, but now they pose a threat into the societies. So how do we then respond? Do we respond by empowering or by further, either making them more, perpetrators or victimizing them? And what kind of cycle are we carrying on, continuing with? That's the first point. Then secondly, I'm not really part of the Bosadi program, but I like to believe we can add something called feminist economics. We just spoke about how women are working at times, for at homes, those chores they do it for free, of which feminist economics speaks to that. If we can also have the foundation about feminism, whether from high school or university, so that we can all understand. Problem is when if you tell me a feminist, first thing that comes to mind is a woman. But I also fail to understand that it also speaks to me, in a way, when we sit down and critically dissect it. So I'd like to believe we also need to add feminist economics to understandings of how the economy currently, my comrade, he left, he spoke about the political economy, how the political economy foundations still, we gotta agree that, favors one gender over the other. But if we were to add feminist economics understandings, we get to see how we can move the marginalized also to the center. That's one of the concepts I like to believe we can add to our feminist and Bosad. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I think there's a last hand at the back, and then we'll give the panelists, maybe they want to give a comment or something, and then we'll close from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I'm Dr. Maneli from the Department of Police Practice. One of the speakers during the presentations mentioned the crime of rape. That's one topic that quite interests me in my PhD study. My study was based on the rape of elderly women in the Eastern Cape. Most of the victims were also women who reside in rural areas. Now, if one were to look at the quarterly statistics that are given by the Minister of Police, year on year, quarter on quarter, at least 10,000 rapes are reported per quarter in South Africa. That makes it around about 40,000 rapes which are reported annually. And each year, the numbers are more or less the same. And we also know that those are not all the rapes that actually took place. Those numbers are only the ones that are reported to the police. Now, we have this, I know last year the president said gender-based violence as categorized as a disaster. But what I want to ask to the panel, the courts are there, we have legislation which talks to rape, but we are still seeing these high numbers of rapes reported to the police. what else could we do as a society, academia, law enforcement, and civil society, to address this crime, because it seems it's not getting any better. And most of the victims are women in general and children. And as my study says, it includes elderly women as well. That is the question that I want to pose to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. Panelists?
Okay, can I start?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, she can go ahead.
Okay.
I'm asking to go first so that I can get it over and done with, and then relax and watch my fellow panelists sweat. I wouldn't have done justice if I didn't mention this to you specifically, so that when I first joined the CGE many moons ago, the chairperson was Mr. Mfanozole Shozi, who's now Dr. Mfanozole Shozi. I think she's at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Very vibrant in driving the agenda for gender equality, but a very progressive man, I must say, able to know when the balance must come in. And I'm deliberate in saying this because, again, I feel that we tend to overburden women. We are saying it is feminists who must answer as to why the boy child is left behind. It is women that must answer that. Why must we answer for women and then come again and answer for men? Where are you as men? Why are you not standing up for yourselves? Why are you not advancing your own cause like feminists have? Through brutal systems and contexts, women we always have to stand and almost raise our voices because we are in rooms or spaces that are dominated by men. But the question is always to us, why aren't you men advancing your own cause? I also think what I had wished to hear from the room as well was on the issue of Meninism and the Red Pill movement. Are we being deliberate about not mentioning those in the room? Or are we just here to attack feminists and tell them what to do and not what to do? Again, there's an issue that I'd like to bring forward. Prof. Kopano Ratele, a few weeks ago, posted on Facebook, and he asked a question, where are men in humanities? Because in his assessment, there's a decline. There's a decline in the number of men taking up higher education in the humanities. Where are they? Because we need their voices. We need progressive men who will go out there and say, we admit women in their majority are being raped. Old women, young women, children, and the perpetrators are often men. It's a reality, it is a fact. But that is not to say men are monsters. That is not to say we do not need men. Well, there are feminists who say we don't, because feminism is about choice. So mine is to say, take your own cause forward as men. We should be asking you, where are your brothers, where are your uncles? Not the other way around. There's a question I was asked as I was introduced. Prof mentioned that I am a first-year MBA student, and one of our lecturers posed this question and said, in my experience, it looks as though it is women who write very well on leadership. What is that? And he opened that up for discussion. And of course, me with my background as a gender person, I don't want to say activist, as a gender person, I put up my hand and I raised the very issues that ma'am is raising around the form of leadership that we promote within leadership in feminism in all its continuum. Because right now I'm not arguing black feminism, whatever. I'm just saying the theorizing around leadership in our space is one that is power sharing, and it's one of reflexivity As women, we do not shy away from holding up the mirror. And those are some of the principles or fundamentals of feminism. So she's correct to say we should take the course forward in terms of teaching, perhaps, about these ideals around leadership. But leadership doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to always be aggressive. That leadership can be soft. We speak of the concept of soft power. I don't have to be the loudest so that I can be understood, but I can make a point, sharp, straight to the point, and then hold back. So I agree with her that we do need to do that. I think, fellow feminists, please coin these concepts for us around leadership. Very important. The reason why I have an interest in governance, in management, and strategic leadership, it's because I'd like to advance these concepts. But there's an important question that was raised around the black girl child and the issue of 16. I think lawyers, you can ask around the concession between 12 and 16 and access. There is a concession, right? Around access to contraceptives at 12, but consent at 16. You will tell us about those, they are there. But also I think it's a question of agency, right? But to what extent can a child exercise agency? These are the questions that come to the fore. How much of it is coerced? How much of it is because of material conditions that a child gives in or is given in? Because as the CGE, we are currently conducting a study on statutory rape. And the number of our participants are saying it is because of our socioeconomic context that at a very young age, I'm already a sex worker. It is because I'm from an orphaned-headed household. But also just broadly, at what point do we ask how can agency be exercised freely by a 16-year-old, and at what point is it really coerced? And that's important because Prof spoke about indigenous knowledge systems and issues of culture. I know that there's a history to culture, and I understand about the infiltration of colonialism, but we must also hold ourselves to account because culture is not so innocent, it's not always pure. So even through the Bosadi theorizing, we should not make it as though it is pure, it is perfect. Because some of the men we spoke to are saying, where I'm raised, as long as I see breasts, she is ready for sexual intercourse. Where I'm from, for as long as she's this age, she is ready. But also just to say in closing, some of the men said, "Resile rona es banna." Sometimes we do this because we know we can get away with it. We know the rules, we know the law. But because there's injustice and the punitive measures are not so strong, we know that no one will come looking for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Claude.
Thanks. I don't know how this works.
Just press
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you.
You know, for me, I refuse to look at rape as just rape. Rape is quite complex. So with that being said, in its complexity, you can't for sure say that there is just one single answer that will work for every community or group. It's quite complex. And that being said, so I'm worried. I don't want, because I'm very much aware that there's different strands of feminisms, and some of them might not agree or align with what I'm about to say. But because I raised the issue of secular colonialism, expansion, racial capitalism, and apartheid, and now we're in a constitutional democratic state, I'd like for us, when we get the time, even if it's 1 second, to think back on how much we have normalized. We have normalized that tall black figure. That tall dark figure is problematic, and you are not doing much to demystify it. We are not saying what we are thinking about that tall dark figure. We all know who the tall dark figure is, and we know who invented it. And law was part of that project during colonialism, that invented the tall dark figure. That rapist that is a black man. That myth that only black men rape. The myth that only black men should be punished and hanged for, I'm sorry if I'm being emotional, for rape only, you know? So we start there. We need to demystify that and unlearn it. We need to unlearn that. A rapist could be anyone, regardless of color. So let's start there. Let's demystify the myth of the black male rapist. And it goes back to history. It goes back to colonialism. It goes back to apartheid. How the, what they call it, they, what is it again in academic terms? Let me just say it, black danger. That tall dark figure there, the swart gevaar, is very problematic. It's quite problematic. Let's try and demystify that. Let's normalize that anyone can be a rapist. It shouldn't be that tall dark figure, which we know reads black men. Let's normalize that. Anyone can rape. It can be an Indian guy, it can be a white guy, it can be a black guy. Because what it does, it demonizes black men. And it's the last thing we need right now. We don't need any more demonization of black men. And that comes from feminists, by the way. And I'm not the only feminist that speaks that language. So let's normalize demystifying the myth around the black men as hypersexual and promiscuous and always ready to have sex with just anybody. Number two, let's also normalize respecting women and their boundaries. So there is this myth again that we need, that again is an invention, that black women are promiscuous and that anyone can have easy access to our bodies. And that makes black women rapeable. That's what they call the unrapeability of black women. And again, law is a culprit there. It institutionalized the unrapeability of black women. Because the black women, they came before courts. Back in the day, that was before 1994, we need to do a study there and establish how many black people, how many black women were raped and never reported their rapes because they knew that their rapes would be disregarded, they would be ignored by the police, the prosecutors, the judges. You know, so for me, it starts from there. That we need, if we can maybe, I'm not saying that that is the only answer. It's not, like I said at the beginning, that rape is quite complex. But for me, where my standpoint, where I am coming from, let's just, those two, let's respect boundaries and let's respect particularly those that have been stigmatized as easy access, as easy pickings, you know? So for me, I would just end there for now. I hope that partly answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for making the conversation really, really heated and thought-provoking. At this point, I'm sure we still have a couple of things going in our mind where we're not satisfied. And I also want to take the opportunity to apologize for our late start. And I'm sure I gave back so much time for the discussion to compensate for our late start. At this point, I would like to call on Prof. Sorombe to give us a closing remark. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I know you want me to start and finish now. So let me say all potholes observed. Not protocol, but potholes. Mine is a very difficult task, having listened to all the deliberations that has taken place this afternoon, and to appreciate the frank discussions, not just about women and Busadi theorization, but about humanity. This is what it's all about. So I appreciate the discourse, and I appreciate the frank discussion that has happened here. And in the vein of our theme, Unisa's CNA's Empowering Change,
Let me first of all ask us to appreciate the keynote speaker, Ms. Lebano, with a round of applause. Your engagement this afternoon has left us wanting to hear more about where this is coming from. More so because you speak with conviction, you speak with assertiveness, but most importantly, with a clear voice that says, this must be done and this must be appreciated. You took us through memory lane. You managed to account for what has happened in the past, but more important, what is it that we must do today and tomorrow? I think that is most important and critical for us. Speaking about land ownership is part of the litmus test that also reverberates along what gender equality means. It's not just about land ownership, it is about anything of substance. We speak about our rural mothers and our sisters. If you look at the high population that we have there of women, and yet they are just placeholders. They are beacons to know whose land starts from there and ends there. Because they are the ones who stay in the rural areas. They are keeping the land for somebody who is not even there. Mostly because they are heading those households. The men have first disappeared into the horizon. Those who still come, they may still come once a year and go back to where they come from. I liked the emotion that came along in the panelists. It is not bad to be emotional. It's very important to be emotional because we are emotional human beings. Without emotions, we are not breathing. Without emotions, we don't have blood running in our veins. So I will be emotional with my research. And I would speak to that in my personal capacity because it is the only place and space that I can express myself. I've spoken about before what we call research autonomy. In an academic environment like this, many freedoms have been curtailed. But it can only be your expression through research that you are untouchable. Nobody can do anything to you when you are a researcher because you are expressing yourself. So young people, you see some of us are getting old now. Be expressive and show your colors and tell the men what you feel about them in your research. There's nothing that they can do about it. If they want to do something about it, they must also do research and fight back through research. So I'm so grateful that this discussion has happened. I'm so thankful the panel was up to the point. And ultimately, the question that is left for all of us is to ask, what is this Busadi, or who is this Busadi human theorization? The simple question that I have, or the simple answer that is derived, it is the mother that produced me that we are speaking about. It is the sister that is joined with me at the hip that I was born with, but that I continue to interact with every day. I do remember one day, my mother was sitting there, she's late now. I was giving my inaugural lecture as a full professor, that was 2014. And of course, Professor Pakeng was in charge of that occasion. And of course, she made a very good joke. She said, Professor Saurombe, if your mother had stopped, because I'm the ninth born I'm ninth born in 10, right? If your mother had stopped at 8, we're not going to have a professor today. Yeah, but even though it was a joke, it stuck with me. That's why I'm remembering it today. The impact of this woman, okay? She had the power and the authority to say no at 2 or at 3 or at 1 or none. But of course, I'm here today. So women are enablers of life and everything that defines it. And lastly, if we have to make changes, the change that we speak about must come from within. We must believe in this in ourselves as we close our eyes and comprehend and contemplate that these issues are very important and critical for our survival. And especially, I like your last comment about men and boys. They are not just disappearing in social studies. They are disappearing everywhere, right? During the long weekend, I think around Easter, I went for a Boy Scouts with my son. And there were also girls there. They came along because we take them along. And when we were doing activities, the boys were so lazy. And as the men who were part of the Scouts, we said, but what is happening here? And we then realized this thing is happening not just today, but it has been happening for a very long time. The boys and the men are disappearing. Not being present, but being influential and being fruitful, but being purposeful. Let us change that narrative. And I hope through what has been discussed today, Prof. Manamela is going to appreciate your research outputs that come out of it, because we are an academic institution, and through these CNAs, we will truly embrace and empower change and contribute to research and all the activities which this university stands for. Thank you very much, and most welcome next time we call you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rumbe. Thank you everyone for your patience, for your interactions, for the discussions and the questions that we are taking back home in our heads. At this point, I would like to let you know that there's lunch outside for us. But before we go, Prof. Mtlongo, can you just please come forward for the small token of appreciation to our panelists? Thank you.
you.